Hi everyone, we're group number 1 of the third cut in International Relations morning class, and we will develop the following question. What explains the imperial impulse and the liberal internationalist tradition? To correctly answer our question, we must first understand the concept of liberal internationalist tradition, which goes hand by hand with what it means to be a liberal state, so we can demonstrate its possible relationship with the imperial impulse. Liberalism as a model of government has been remarkably successful. Liberal internationalists believe that power itself is the product of ideas and ideas can change. Thus, liberal democracies predominate in Europe and the Americas and increasingly in parts of Africa and Asia. The essence of liberalism is self-restraint, moderation, and compromise and peace, whereas the essence of international politics is exactly the opposite, troubled peace at best or the state of war. While, on the other hand, imperial impulse means an unswerving intention to exercise absolute command and control from the top of the socio-political hierarchy.
Internationalist ideas go hand in hand with the belief that reasons could deliver freedom and justice and international relations. Internationalism became a shorthand to describe the growing hand of activism, feminist policies, and organizations, all pushing for various reforms in domestic society and in the wider international society. It is important to notice that liberal states are pacific in their international relations with other liberal states. However, countries with this ideologic model in their international relations tend to protect themselves first over others, and constantly changing. Early liberal internationalists thought on international relations took the view that the natural order had been corrupted by secret treaties and update policies such as the balance of power. Also, Enlightenment liberals believed that the problems of the war be solved through the development of a body of international rules and laws, constantly changing.
The idea of a natural harmony of interests in international political and economic relations came under challenge in the early part of the 20th century. The First World War shifted liberal thinking towards a recognition that peace is not a natural condition but is one that must be constructed. This situation led to the creation of a League of Nations to regulate international hierarchy through the exercise of collective security. The League's constitution also called for the self-determination of all nations. However, despite widespread agreement on this principle, a host of practical and moral problems limited its implementation. The distribution of power and interests in international system values and purposes were inextricably linked to power, so the imperial impulse of the liberal internationalist powers continued. A good example is that Iraq had always argued that the sovereign state of Kuwait was an artificial creation of the imperial powers, demonstrating this imperial impulse in a clear way through the intrusion of these liberal internationalist ideas and actions.
Some observers argue that the internationalist principles that have been a feature of the liberal order since 1945 are in crisis. The relative power of the United States is diminishing, and hence its capacity to deal with global risks is also reducing. Rising powers want a greater share of authority. The hope that Europe could emerge as a second superpower, which could strengthen the internationalist rules and values, has proven to be false, and there's a widespread evidence of a return to a form of state sovereignty in which intervention on internationalist grounds will not find support in the UN Security Council or among the majority of member states. Alongside those who lament the inability of the state and global institutions to deliver a liberal peace are more critical voices who point out how structural patterns of hierarchy persist. These patterns are actively reproduced by security and developed doctrines and policies. As a result, the liberal international order remains conveniently favorable to the most powerful states in the system. Liberal internationalist governments have a responsibility to protect other people from atrocity crimes, but on the other hand, this supports the imperialist impulse. Given the prominence of the United States, Britain, and France on the UN Security Council, this is seen as another regime of control exercised by wealthy Atlantic powers over countries in the global south who have only become independent. The sovereign state can no longer be relied on to sustain institutions and purposes of the liberal order. Liberalism has produced such unequal gains for the West and the rest. The potential of liberal internationalism to embrace imperialism is a tendency. Liberty enables the creation of wealth, which can trigger a drive to find new markets. Historically, professional militaries worked in tandem with the great trading companies to ensure favorable terms of trade. In this sense, U.S. foreign policy in the post-1945 period has a close resemblance to the great expansionist Republican states.
In international relations, this issue of multilateral agreements between states is very important because in international scenarios it is essential to comply with political, economic, legal, and diplomatic materials, since the liberal internationalist promotes liberal democracy. There so they can intervene in other states to achieve global structures that promote a new world order, which must be followed back closely because these changes can be determined and studied by specialists in international relations.
In terms of international business, we can infer that this imperial impulse can open doors to new business models in relation to emerging markets that end up being these countries with liberal internationalist traditions who advocate for their personal interests, especially when it faces new cultures and emerging countries with increasingly solid economies, which has a great relationship with international business that can also help us to understand the behavior of these world organizations and the interests of these countries from the economic and political point of view of the international relations.
In conclusion, this imperial impulse is motivated by the power of the great Western powers and world organizations that imply personal interests in their international relations policies, and in the liberal internationalist traditions and the standards that they impose and the way in which they regulate their laws and wills in the world order. One response to this perceived crisis of liberal internationalism is more liberalism. This means not forgetting the fact that even during the high watermark of British imperial rule, liberalism not only justified the empire, but it also provided the resources to launch stinging criticism of it. Criticisms are needed with respect to the ongoing harms and atrocities that are experienced by vulnerable people's harms, that can only be challenged using a language of universal rights and responsibilities and demand international institutions to be more effective.
Working in groups is hard at the beginning because of the lack of trust between the new group members. But with great organization, task divisions, and positive attitude, we accomplish to work together. We all love working in groups because it really motivates us to contribute with ideas. And it is always nice to meet new people. Thanks to the different ways of thinking, we can create more complex solutions. During this activity, we have the opportunity to think out of the box in each specific task, which is very fun and useful. As IB student, this question allows us to understand a specific international model which give us helpful knowledge for international businesses.